Okay, so let's start with the snorkeler image. I'm going to bring him in, him or her, I'm not really sure, but under Photoshop, just drag it in there. Next one I'm going to pull is the shark. Okay. Alright, so the first thing I'll always do under image is change this to the CMYK color mode. That's for my one piece, and then the CMYK color mode for the other. Before this step, it would always be start out with a sketch and me figuring out a concept, and then finding the assets to put the concept together, and then bringing them into Photoshop and then actually doing it. So the first thing I do after I change the color mode here is I double click that background layer, right, to unlock it. So if you see the snorkeler image, I didn't do my double click action yet, but double clicking that background layer will unlock it. Just hit OK. So now I can move this around with my move tool if I wanted to. I'm really going to want to do that because I want to actually just drag this shark and bring it over to the snorkeler image, and it's at a good size. At this point, I want to press Command T to rotate this shark image so it's following the same plane that the water in the background is following. Kind of position this and then resize it. So Command T, if you remember, is the transform tool. And so our goal here is to make this look as realistic as possible by blending this shark into this image. Just kind of create a new feeling for this image. So the first thing, the next thing I'm going to need to do, just nudge this into position. Just imagine where that this water ripple is going to go behind the legs, etc. The next piece of this would be to go into the eraser tool by hitting E. Otherwise, I can just pick it from my palette here on the left. Hovering over the image here with my shark layer selected. In reality, I should probably name these shark and then background. Or I'll call it something more descriptive. So with my eraser tool, then I'm gonna get my opacity to 100% so it's completely erasing pixels at 100%, just like that. I'm going to go over here and actually make the hardness of the eraser tool not as hard, so bringing it low so then I can get more of like a kind of a blend around the edge, because I just want to rough this out. It doesn't have to be perfect at all. It's not. So just kind of get it close to get rid of that hard edge around there. The next thing I'm going to want to do is notice that this fin is sticking out of the water. So my end goal here is to make the shark look like it's under this green tinted water that we have. So part of what I'll need to do is cut this fin, because when I make color edits to the shark layer itself, I don't want those color edits to affect the fin, because the fin is not going to be in the water. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to go over to my layers palette, and I'm just going to hold the Alt key, click and drag this shark up. So I'm making the new shark layer here, so it's a duplicate of the original. I'm just going to call it fin. And then I'm going to turn this shark layer behind it off, so I'm only having one shark layer, or one fin layer that I'm working with. And then I'm basically going to use the selection tool to figure out what's the best way to kind of capture this fin and just delete everything else but the fin. So I'm going to use my pen tool because that's kind of my favorite tool to use for the most part. And I'm just going to start creating and drawing a path around this fin. The pen tool is also probably one of the better ones to use for this situation because you have a really hard edge shape. It's pretty basic, so this would be a pretty decent tool to use. So I'll just complete the shape here with my pen tool, and then go over to Paths, my Paths panel. With my work path selected, this is just a default name. I'm going to hit this little menu here in the upper right for the paths palette, and then hit Make Selection. Just leave it defaulted as New Selection. Hit OK. So now you can see you can see those little marching ants, those little dotted lines around this fin section. Finally, I have the fin outlined. What I want to do is delete everything but the fin on this fin layer. So a keyboard shortcut for this would be Command-Shift-I, the letter I. Otherwise, it's Control-Shift-I on the Windows machine. Otherwise, you can go up into the menu under Select and hit Select Inverse. So select Inverse. So this is going to just select the opposite of what I have selected. So sometimes this is a good, a lot of times I would say this is a good option. With the inverse selected, I'm going to go over to the Move tool. Just click that and then hit the Delete key. So the Move tool is kind of your default key you just kind of go to move things around, delete things, etc. Alright, so with this fin piece here, I'm just going to go back into my eraser. I hit E to do that real quick in a shortcut and just kind of clean up that edge. So at this point, I'm going to turn back on the shark layer. So we're back to square one here. I have the fin on top on a separate layer from the shark section itself. The next goal is to get this blue water to kind of match this green water more so. To do that, it's not going to be perfect, but I'm going to make sure that my shark layer is selected. And I'm going to go to Image and Adjustments. And so under Image Adjustments, what I'm going to do now is the Destructive color editing piece. Okay, so I'm actually going to permanently change the color of these pixels, and they're not going to be able to be changed back, or filter layers are not going to be able to turn on or off to re-change and change those again. So let me just kind of go ahead and do let's see, Selective Color. I'm going to hit Selective Color, and then under the Cyan's color channel, I'm going to bring out some of the cyan, add a little bit more yellow, maybe add some more cyan, bring out some magenta, bring out some black. With my preview box, I can kind of see the before and after. It's getting a little bit greener, which is okay. Maybe I need some more cyan. Nope, it's not going to work more so. So I'll take some more out. It's kind of the experimental piece of it. I'll jump into the blues under colors and see what kind of results I can get out of that. So I'm pulling out magenta from the blue channels, and then a little bit more of the cyan. Adding the yellow. Yeah, that's probably pretty decent. So here's kind of a before and after. I've gotten it to a point where it's almost there. It's not 100% quite there, but it's close for now. Further, I'm going to take my eraser tool again, and then just make my brush pretty large, and I'm going to reduce the opacity as well. So I'm going to bring it down to a 30% opacity. So every kind of click is going to very much more subtly then, at this point, erase more of that edge. So my goal here is to kind of blend this a little bit more. So it's not such a hard transition. You can see here that I still have some of that water in the background going over the leg, and I'm going to have to fix that in a little bit. But my next step is to then use another tool, and that is another one we went over last time. That is the layering blending mode. So layer blending mode is applied to any layer, and the default is normal, which is right here. So under the shark layer, I'm going to change the blending mode for that layer, and I know exactly what I need to pick, and that's luminosity. So all these things, as I click through these different layers, right, it's giving me all these different effects, and you know, some work, some don't. Some do things that I never thought they would do, and they just are not affecting the image the way I want it to. But luminosity is the one that kind of gets me where I feel like I need to be. Furthermore, I'm looking at it and I'm seeing that there's areas here where I probably do want to erase a little bit more, because you can see that the ripple in the water here is a little bit different than the ripples in the water here. They're more kind of, I would say, the ripples are kind of more aggressive on the image with the legs than they are with the image with the shark. So it's almost like the shark was in more still water than the legs are in that type of water. So I'm just going to take the eraser tool again and just kind of brush it to get some more of that more aggressive water to come through. And see, I'm kind of going behind this fin, and it's not affecting it because the fin is on a separate layer. So thinking about the layers and kind of brushing as I go along here is helping out. So now at this point, it's kind of at a point where it's like, okay, I can see that the shark is kind of there in the water. The next thing I want to do is just use my selections to, my selection options to get rid of this overlap here. So there's a lot of different ones. Typically I would just go with a pen tool, but otherwise what I'm going to do is just do the, show you another one that we've seen before, is this magnetic lasso. Again, I'm making sure that the swimmer layer is selected, and the magnetic lasso, if you remember, will drop down points where it sees differences between pixel, tone, and color. So the difference between this this skin tone here and this this water in the background is going to be where the points start to drop off. So you see it's adding points as I go along here. It's kind of magnetically sticking to that area. Alright, so then I'll just encircle it like that. Click my move tool, make sure my shark layer is selected, because this is the layer piece that I want to delete from the top of the leg, and I'll just hit delete. Alright. So now it kind of looks like it's back there in the background. Alright, next I'm going to make this image have more of kind of a Jaws feeling. So I'm going to put some blood in the water, and I'm going to use the brush to kind of do that. So I'm going to use the hit B, or otherwise just select the brush tool from the palette here. What I'm going to do then is select a color. So let me kind of go back. So the color I'm going to pick, I know exactly what it is because it has to be like a certain tone of red in order for this image to work. I was kind of doing a lot of experimenting, trying to figure out which tone of red would work the best, because eventually I'm going to do a layer blending mode onto it, so it kind of goes in with the ripples in the water here. So my brush is selected. I have a new layer. It's empty right now. Now I'm going to, under my brush type, I'm going to pick just a brush that I think might work for this. So it gives you, your brushes panel gives you all these different brushes. So here's like an airbrush. Here's some pencils, charcoal, just a lot of different things. Um, some is even shaped like a blade of grass or something, or even just odd different shapes like leaves or something like that. I'm just going to kind of use the basic here because I want to show you another tool that's going to kind of help me get the effect. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I don't want to spend too much time on this demo overall, but I want to kind of give you an idea of what this is going to kind of do. So I'm kind of brushing a little bit here. I'm not being too perfect with it, absolutely not. I want to make sure that I'm being as efficient as possible. And I really just want to kind of do real, just random brush strokes here. So eventually, we're going to use another tool. And you can see the effect. I can kind of sort of spackle it too with this brush. So if I just click and not drag, it'll kind of give me just kind of dots and stuff, as if I'm like just tapping my brush on a canvas. Bless you. So as you're working on this, and all you illustrators as well, I definitely encourage you to experiment with this because Photoshop's gotten a lot better with taking advantage of styluses as well. So definitely look into that as well as you're working on images, and just take some time to experiment with these different brushes because there's so many to go over every single thing and how you can layer it and how you can blur it and everything. It's just so time consuming. So what I did was I just alt-clicked and dragged the original blood layer to make a copy of it. And I'm just going to call this one the blur. And so I made a duplicate, but I want to actually blur this so eventually it'll get the effect that it's kind of fading into the water a little bit. So I'll go up to Filter with the blur layer selected, and I'm going to hit Blur, and then I'll choose Gaussian Blur. So you can see it kind of gives this more of this faded effect, and I'll hit OK. Another thing I want to do is show you the Smudge tool. So that one is over here on the left, and if you hold down, it'll start with the blur tool. That'll be the default tool in this menu. It's got this little teardrop. If you click and hold any of these menu items that have these little fly out arrows, these little arrows on the bottom right, and basically all of them do, it looks like, in this menu. So just click and hold an option, and you'll see other options underneath it. And we're looking for the smudge tool. So this kind of mimics just like a finger smudging a paint, almost like finger paint, if you will, on a layer. So if I click and drag, I can change the intensity of it, or the strength, they call it. So I'll change the strength to do 75% just to get it more of a smudge effect. And I'll kind of zoom in and show you a little bit closer what's going on. Maybe I'll give it some more strength here. And I'll actually select a different brush. So with the smudge tool, you can select different brushes as well and smudge in different ways. So that's a little bit more intense. I'll bring it down just with the standard brush here. So I'm trying to get an effect of like it's kind of spreading through the water from the center. So there's all kinds of different tools you can mess around with to kind of get the effect you're looking for. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it's not going to be at this point because we still haven't layered this, or blended, I'm sorry, this layer into the water yet. We're just kind of establishing the form. Just trying to make it not look like it was actually literally brushed on there. Something like that. I almost feel like I need some more blur, but I'm not going to do that yet. And so at this point, I'm going to go into the blood layer and then actually choose a layer blending mode. And for this one, I chose multiply. And then that kind of got me where I was hoping to be, although the blur is sort of not helping very much. So what I can do is actually reduce the opacity of the blur so it's not as intense. And I'll even reduce it more like that. And let's see if I can. As I'm going through, I don't know if you can see it very well, but as I'm going through and doing different layer blending modes on the blur piece itself, it's kind of making very subtle changes to it. But I think normal is probably working the best. Although saturation seems to be. And finally, I think I need to reduce this. No, actually that needs to be like that. So it'd take a lot more work, but essentially it's maybe 3/4 of the way there, halfway there. Another piece that I could do is to add to this is actually outline these legs here. So if I turn off these top layers and I know I need to trace this leg out, I can again kind of choose it with a different selection method. So I'll do the wand this time, and that picked it pretty quickly. The leg piece. If you remember this quick mask tool, if you click this, you can see with the color of your choosing what is selected and what is not as a preview. So I can turn it on or off. I'll turn it on, and then if you remember in the quick mask mode, you can use your eraser tool as well to delete something you have selected. So I'll just deselect this by erasing the quick mask color that I have. And then so jump out of quick mask mode and you can see what I have selected again. So with my current selection then of these legs here, I'm going to use this kind of as a barrier so I can start removing some of this overlap here that's affecting some of the depth that's happening. So if I again go to select inverse, now I'm selecting the inverse of what my legs are, so everything but my legs. And then on my blood layer here, I'll take my eraser tool and then I'll just start removing what I need to. Adjust the opacity a bit, make it larger perhaps. Kind of brush it like so. Maybe I can even reduce it a little bit more and kind of start working on the other parts and start erasing. Stuff around the edges. And I don't have to be too careful because I'm not going to erase any of this effect on my those legs at all. So selections are helpful in isolating things as well. Finally, what I want to show you is how to use non-destructive color editing. So I'll show you both destructive and non-destructive, both side by side. I did show you the destructive by prior by changing the shark water color originally. I'm going to work on these fins here. So under one thing I want to do first is actually go into my quick mask mode, select a brush, but not a fancy brush like that. I just want to do like a standard one. And I'm going to really rough select these flippers, right? I'm doing it rough because they don't need to be perfect because there's so much contrast between the yellow of the flipper and the blue background that I will be able to change the color just by selecting the correct color pixels in my HueSaturation menu without having to trace this thing out perfectly. So just in quick mask mode then, I just kind of selected that, and you can see very roughly that it's that the marching ants here are encircling these fins. Then under image adjustments, I'm going to go into HueSaturation, which is up here. Now under HueSaturation, there's some options, but what I can do is under this master menu, I can select yellows. Now I'm targeting the yellows in this area. So obviously we're not going to have very many yellows in the blue, but we're going to have a lot in this fin area. So this is selecting this option here is preventing me from having to actually perfectly trace this out, and I can kind of work faster. And so now on my HueSaturation menu, the hue slider, I can actually move this hue slider, and I can change the color of these fins to whatever color I want without much effort. So hue is going to change the hue, obviously the color. Saturation is going to adjust the darkness or the intensity of the color that I have chosen in the hue. And then lightness is just going to make it either a darker tone or a lighter tone. So you can basically do any color you want there just using that menu, so I can swap out and then just change the color of those fins to that. And you can see since I had yellows targeted in my HueSaturation menu, it didn't affect the background around it. So let me just take a step back then and show you what would have happened if I went to HueSaturation and did not choose, did not target just the yellow pixels, and I just kept master on. If I was to change it, now you can see the background actually becoming affected by the filter. So just by hitting yellows, I was able to target the yellows and not affect the background. So this HueSaturation menu here is a destructive color editing technique, meaning that this layer with the legs, the swimmer layer that I've affected the color on, is permanently changed now. You can see it in my thumbnail, it's totally changed. So to show you the non-destructive color editing, I'll keep my same selection, that real rough selection that I had, make sure that my swimmer layer is selected. And then instead of image adjustments for my destructive color editing, I'm going to go to layer, and then hit New Adjustment Layer. And then so under New Adjustment Layer, many of the same color adjustment options for destructive color editing show up as non-destructive color editing options. So under HueSaturation here, what Photoshop's going to do is tell me that I'm going to have a new layer created. It's going to give it a name. It'll give you the option of marking it with a color over here in your layers palette and so on. I can adjust the opacity or the intensity of it, but I'm just going to hit OK. Even here you can actually change the blending mode of it before it's even created. So let me move this out of the way because I kind of got in our way when we made that selection, but this is an important panel. But what I want to bring you to is the this layer here in my layers palette. Again, it's added an adjustment layer over the swimmer layer. Okay. So, and you can see kind of this white shape here. That's the exact shape of what I had selected prior from my quick mask mode selection, that real rough paintbrush that I did in quick mask mode that created that selection. Now it's really applying a layer over this kind of cookie cutter window over this. So when I go in here and then adjust the master hue, you can see I'm doing the same thing I was doing in the destructive color editing mode. Alright, I have a couple of options down here where I can just undo, sort of bring back to the original, the edits that I've made in the palette. But this properties palette will just pop up when you create a new adjustment layer. So again, I have this targeting option here where I can just target yellows. Just like in my destructive color editing, I can do the same thing. The benefit to this is I can just come back into this properties panel anytime I want and go ahead and then change this, anytime in the future or whatnot. Put that back to 0. Another benefit to that is that I can turn this layer off and then go back to the original as well. So I haven't lost it. Yet another kind of bonus is I can select the swimmer layer again. I can go back into quick mask mode with my brush. I'll just rebrush the area. So let's say if you imagine this is well, you don't really have to imagine much actually, because this is sort of like a shoe. It's more of a flipper. But if you wanted to show a product line of different color flippers for different seasons and so on quickly without having completely different files, you can just layer a new Photoshop layer. So again, I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and HueSaturation, and just hit OK. And then I'll target the yellows again, but then do just a different color, right? And it's not perfect because I missed some of this yellow, but hopefully you get the idea. So now under my layers panel, hide those. I can turn on or off these different color options. Now, what's going to happen in the future, what's nice is that you'll be able to have one product, multiple layers within one Photoshop file, turn on and off those layers in InDesign without having to do a save as for a different image. So if I was to say, I want my product to have the purple flippers, I want the blue product version and the yellow, I don't have to make 3 different Photoshop files to achieve that. I can just make one with different layers within it. And then I'll show you in the future how you can turn on or off those layers in InDesign to make you more efficient. when you're designing things. So I just want to confirm that that was all I needed to go over. I'm sorry.